Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. On this episode of BlazorTrain, we look at how to do pop-up windows in Blazor. Traditionally, pop-up windows require the user to allow them. And some users miss the prompt, and the result is a tech support headache. But fortunately, there's a solution that doesn't require creating a whole new window to create a modal dialog, which is really what you want. Typically, modal dialogs are used for confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete this record? That type of thing. But you can use modal dialogs for any situation in which you want to offer functionality from one component without leaving or modifying the current page. For example, selecting an item from a list. By moving this functionality to a modal dialog, your list doesn't have to take up vital real estate on your page, and your user can stay focused on the task at hand. Woo, woo! So today, I'm going to show you two ways to do modal dialogs in Blazor. The first is using an open source project called Blazored.Modal. In fact, I've invited Chris Sainty, the creator of Blazored.Modal, to give us a demo of how to use it. Next, I'll show DevExpress's DX Popup. This does modal dialogs and it's part of the DevExpress Blazor component suite. But it does modals a little bit differently. But I think you're going to like it. And that's all coming up right now, right here on BlazorTrain. Well, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome back to BlazorTrain for the second time, Mr. Chris Sainty from London. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, Carl. How are you?
Excellent. I'm about to dive off the cliff with my audience here into the world of creating your own components and making them reusable. And as a consumer of your open source components, I wanted to introduce the audience to some of these things, and in particular, your modal dialog component.
So what I'm going to do is I've got the sample project running here, which is included in the repo. So I thought what we'll do is we'll work through each section here because this shows off all of the kind of main features of the modal.
Okay.
And we can kind of get a feel for what we can do with it. So before we sort of go into any of the really like nitty gritty bits, well, I'll just show you a really simple example. So this is the most sort of simple way you can use the modal. When you click it, you get that modal dialog. It's pretty standard now. We're all used to seeing these things. Yeah, we've got close buttons and we've got background clicks that can close the modal and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. We have keyboard navigation and stuff. So if you notice at the moment, there's a focus around this close button, and I can tab, and I just keep tabbing back and forth between these two buttons here. I don't go outside of the modal in any way. This is actually a new feature that's come from one of the community members. It's a suggestion from an issue. And basically, it's to help with accessibility. So we're trying to make the modal more accessible to more people. And it basically helps people people with visual impairments, people who are using screen readers, stuff like this. It helps them not get lost when they're on a site that uses the modal. They don't when they start tabbing, they don't end up falling back into the application behind. And so when they're tabbing, not tabbing down the menu items. Yeah,
that begs a sort of a simple question here, which is a big picture question. Is this a pop-up, considered a pop-up, a whole nother window, or is it just a div that you're displaying and doing some magic to make it sort of the only thing that has focus?
Yeah, so this is a mix of some CSS magic and there is some JavaScript. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
So for a long time, one of the taglines with Blazor.Modal was that it was a JavaScript-free modal library, and with version 5, we did introduce the first bit of JavaScript. Just to be completely clear about the level of that, it's 1.2% of the code base, I think, is now JavaScript, and it's basically to do this focus trap.
As we learned in the last episode, JavaScript is just a necessary thing. Sometimes the component model, the Blazor component model, doesn't have everything in it that we use on the web.
Yeah, definitely, and the Blazor APIs really good and allow you to do interop really simply. You know, like you said, sometimes it is just a necessary evil.
So this isn't a pop-up window is what you're telling me?
No, so this is just a div. So we have a div here that's being rendered, and then there's another div that does that transparent background. So what I'll do is I'll just dive into the code here, and I'll show you what's actually being rendered here in the browser tools. Okay. So if we scroll up here, we can see just here this block of code. So at the top level here, we have a div, and that's the main container. And then inside of there, we have another div, and that's giving us that overlay, so that slightly kind of darkened background. And then
I'm going to move myself over here. Do you mind?
Oh, yeah, cool, yeah. Come join me over this side.
Yeah, I'll join you on this side, yeah. Okay.
Cool. So, we have the first outer div here. So that's the main container for everything. Then we have the overlay, and that's what's providing us that transparent background, that slightly darkened background there. And then we have this third div, which is the actual modal itself. So when I hover over that, you can see sort of the browser tools highlighting the modal for us.
Right.
And that inside of this div is where all of the modal content's rendered. So we have the header element here, and then we have the actual content itself here, and that's more divs. You can see going on down here, and there's the modal content.
Well, that's really great, because the whole pop-up thing is the bane of web developers' existence, isn't it? I mean, when you do pop-ups, now the user has to allow them, and quite often they don't know that it's been blocked. They just know that your app doesn't work. So I really appreciate the way that you avoided that issue.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really great point to bring up, because a lot of modern browsers now will just block pop-ups by default because of privacy and things like this. So as you said, there's users sometimes won't even realize a website has tried to open a pop-up. It will just get blocked automatically, and they'll just be wondering why the functionality has not worked when really it needed to be manually enabled. So this is a nicer approach, because it just bypasses all of that, but it still gives you that nice effect. So you still get that feeling that you've got a pop-up. It's just some CSS magic that's doing it.
It's great.
So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of what's being rendered under the hood and stuff. What I'll do now is I'll jump back to Visual Studio, and I'll show you the actual code that it takes to create an instance of this modal.
Okay.
So I'm going to go into our sample project stuff here, and I'm going to open the index page, which is that first home page. So in order to open a pop-up, this is all that we actually need to do, this one line of code down here. Right. So with what we've done with the newest version of Blazor.Modal is we've moved to a pattern of using a cascading parameter. So we use, instead of in previous versions, we required developers to inject iModal service into their components, and then you would call modal.show. We moved away from that and moved to cascading parameters for a couple of reasons. So firstly, there was a reason because with a cascading parameter, we can actually show a better error message if the right component and the right setup steps haven't been completed by a developer. So if there's if they forget to put the main cascading Blazor.Modal component around their router, we can actually show a meaningful error message from that. So we can say that it's missing that particular component, and
this is a good opportunity to educate the listeners on cascading parameters in general. I think they're extremely powerful, simply put, maybe you can describe it differently, but simply put, this is a way to take any variable really of any type and propagate it throughout all of the pages and all of the components in your project. You essentially put it at the router level, and then anywhere in any page in any component, you can just instantiate it not by injection, but by saying this is a cascading parameter. Obviously, you have the type right there, and now you can access it.
Yeah, That is exactly right. So if I open up the app.razor here, this is the cascading Blazored.Modal. So we wrap this around the router. And what this does is to any component within our Blazor application now, it provides an instance of this iModal service. And each component can decide whether it wants to accept it by declaring this cascading parameter. If you don't want it, you're not interested in it, you just don't declare this cascading parameter and it will just be ignored. You won't get an instance.
What is the difference then between injecting and using cascading parameters? Is it that you can't inject a component? Is it that simple?
So if I injected an iModal service into this component, or I just requested this cascading parameter, in terms of how I use the service, it doesn't change. So if I'd injected it, I would still call this modal.show in the same way that I did before and things like that. The cascading parameter pattern, I guess, is, I think, a more Blazor way of doing things, which sounds really ambiguous. So I'm going to try and firm that up a bit. So injecting into each individual component, that there's nothing wrong with that. There's no problems with that at all. Mm-hmm. But what happens if you don't want to use dependency injection, for example? Like you don't want to register a service in your program CS or your startup CS if you're using Blazor Server. What happens if you just want a single instance of a service or even another component? Because you can pass entire components as cascading values. If you want to do that, that negates the inject directive entirely. You can't use it then because there's nothing to inject. You can't get out of the service container. Mm-hmm. So that's where cascading values come in and cascading parameters, is that they don't need to be registered with dependency injection in order for you to pass instances around. And there's other little interesting quirks. So you can have a state object, for example, as a cascading parameter that sits at the top of your app around your router.
Right. And
you can cascade that state now to your entire application. And you could have other components then update that state, and then you just call state as changed on the method on that main app state, and then it cascades down to your whole app. So you kind of don't have all these sort of weird calls going back and forth trying to keep state in sync and all this kind of stuff. You just have that one state at the top, everything goes up, and then it all cascades back down. And that all happens automatically. So you're not reinventing the wheel here. You're letting Blazor's mechanisms work for you, rather than you having to do a load of extra work. I'm
going to show this. I'm going to show this coming up here, and something that I got the idea from a blog post, one of your blog posts, which is using the cascading parameter for state, as you say, and then defining events on that so that you can communicate between different pages and different components by, essentially raising events and then handling those events in whatever the consumer is. And so this is really cool for me. I'm in my application in the real world, I have a toolbar across the top. It's actually a DevExpress toolbar. And, when all of the data access and all of the SignalR stuff and the state of the app sort of is in there. And now I just poke out different events, and whatever components or pages need to handle those events, we just grab whatever data it is that we want. It's brilliant. It works really well. So you really couldn't do that with dependency injection, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, it would be much more. You could technically do it. So you could inject a service that could have an event that you could subscribe to in each component. But then you're going to have to unsubscribe from that event in each component, and you're going to have to, remember to do that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a memory leak or something.
Right.
Whereas if you've just got a value that's being cascaded down, and then there's just a method that updates that value, call state has changed, that new value just gets cascaded down, and the whole parameter mechanism of Blazor just works. So you can then just have some code in onParameters set, the onParameters set lifecycle method that just listens for that value to be updated, and it just does its thing. And then you're not having to jump through those extra hoops with event subscriptions and desubscriptions. And
okay, I digress, but this was a very nice learning opportunity for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's cool. No worries. So one thing that's I think quite a thing that I liked when we first created the modal was the way that we decide what to show in the modal. A lot of the modals I'd seen with Blazor were all kind of the same style. What they did was repeat modal markup in every component that wanted to show a modal, and then you just toggled its visibility on and off. You might have some Razor code. Let's pretend this was a modal, and that would be the code for the modal. And then if you want to show it, you would just have an if statement around that, and you would just toggle that if. Oh yeah. That Boolean value, and then it would become visible, and it would show, and then you could toggle it off again.
Right.
And that's quite cool for a simple modal. But if you want a modal that's in multiple places in your app, now you've got to start repeating that code everywhere. And that gets quite messy and hard to maintain. So when I came to create this component, I was like, well, what can I do that will make everyone's lives as easy as possible, but still give them flexibility? So I looked at generics. So the way that Blazor.Modal works is you just pass in the type of the component you want it to display. So in this instance here, we're saying show the confirm component. So if I open up the shared folder, the confirm component is in here, and this is the confirm component. Yeah. And this will then get rendered into that structure we looked at earlier in the HTML. That will get rendered into there. So all you have to do as a consumer of the modal is focus on the content of it. You don't have to care about the background, the overlay, the header bar, any of that stuff. But that's all taken care of you. That's just going to be there. All you've got to do is provide the content. So I like that, because what I'm trying to say to people is don't worry about the repeatable stuff. I'll sort that out for you. I'll take care of that. You focus on adding the value to your application. Yeah. And that's all you need to worry about.
Once I discovered that I had complete control inside the type that I was creating, I went to town. I made a modal. I made a modal where you could pick from a list of, let's say, people, and the images, sort of float around, but I wanted it to scroll. So I set the outer div with CSS. I set it to overflow auto, and I set the height to 80 VH, which is 80% of the height of the screen, and the width to 80 VW, which is 80% of the width. So it essentially takes up most of the screen, and then the content scrolls. And it's cool. Brilliant. It's like having pop-ups without having the whole problem of pop-ups.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's really the goal, because when you're using a library like this, you don't want to, you don't want to concern yourself with the nitty gritty, do you? You want to just get in there, use it, add the thing that you want to get on with, and then get going again. Mm-hmm. And this way the way that, like I say, we designed the modal to render the content just seemed to be a nice way to do that. Perfect. It works, really cleanly. It reads really easily, like modal show confirm. Right. It even reads naturally. And then this first parameter here, by the way, that's just the title that's going to be in the modal.
So the card that you have up here, this whole div with a code block inside of it, explain that.
So this is my lazy attempt at not doing a full doc site. Okay. So again, with what I've done with the latest version, so with version 5, I've moved everything in Blazor to use GitHub Actions. And what I now do is publish the Blazor WebAssembly sample project to GitHub pages. So it's basically like living documentation for the...
I see. So this is literally just to show you what the syntax is. If you bring up that page again, this is just displaying, this is what we're going to call. Yeah, I see it in the background now.
So this is showing you that this is the simplest way that you can show the modal. You can just call modal.show, pass in the type, and then the title. And,
all right.
and
I didn't want people to get the idea that that was actually necessary in order to show a modal.
No, definitely not. No, this is just an example here, and I need to flesh this out and make this a bit better, really. But yeah, so that's in there. And then if we go over to we'll go back to this confirm. So this is what we're displaying inside the modal,
right?
There's what we do is we get again using a cascading value here, and we have this cascading parameter to catch that cascading value.
Yep.
We cascade now the actual instance of the modal that this content's being displayed in. And what this does is it allows you to then control the modal. So you can see here that I can call close, I can call cancel, and that's going to dismiss the modal in two different ways.
Right.
So close requires a modal result. And this is essentially, I guess you could think of it like a success path. So that's someone has decided a positive action from the modal. So say you've got a modal like this, which is, you can think of a bit like a confirmation. You've got an OK or a close or a cancel. They can hit close, which is like an acknowledgement. So therefore we're saying it's OK. And then you can pass back whatever you want to the calling code.
And that's the really important thing, is that you can get back complex types, lists of things. Exactly. You can get back anything you want.
Exactly. We'll have a look at that in a sec, Carl. We'll have a look at some more sort of complex stuff. But this is basically the most simple way of doing it, really, which is just to return an OK. So that will then allow you to do something with the response. And we'll have a look at that in a second. Then you've got cancel, which is basically a dismissal. Like, I didn't want to do it as someone hitting the X in the corner, or just hitting cancel, or whatever, just dismissing the modal as in I don't want to do anything with it. So those are both available through this Blazored.Modal instance. And that's going to just remove the whole modal from the screen, and that will get you back into your normal workflow. So that's the most simplistic version. So that's great. So let's start working through some of these other bits.
Okay.
So styling was kind of one of the first things that came about. People wanted the ability to customize the modal, which makes a lot of sense. So this is where we brought in the concept of this modal options. So modal options is an object which has got loads of different options on it that you can configure to customize the modal to what you want it to do. And one of those options is that you can provide a custom class. So if I click on this example here, you can see that we've just got a kind of differently set up modal here. And this is because we're passing in a custom class that's changed the style of the actual modal that's being displayed.
Okay.
So this means that if you want to, if you've got you're working with a designer and you've got a very bespoke design of your modal, you can just provide a CSS class that will apply certain styles to the modal, and we will add it in for you. And therefore, whatever you want to display will then get those styles.
So what's the difference with that, between that and then taking the div, the outer div inside your confirm or whatever it is, and specifying the class there? What's the difference?
So I guess this is a slightly more low maintenance approach, I guess, because instead of having to have loads of, instead of having to specify, say, like a chunk of custom classes in your, you can just specify one.
Specify it on the call rather than on the definition.
Yeah,
I get it.
On the actual definition. The other thing about this, now I was going to show some code, but I'm not going to I'll cancel out that. And this is the same for all of the options for Blazor, is that you can actually specify them at the top level as well to make them global. So instead of this is a per modal basis, so on each individual call to show a modal, you can specify options that are only pertinent to that one instance. Whereas if you, back on that cascading Blazored.Modal, this hasn't been updated yet, whoops, you can specify all of these same options, and that will apply them to every modal. So if you do have that custom class you want to apply to all of your modal instances, you don't have to do this every time. You can specify it once on that top level one that we saw around the router, and that will then just apply it to all of your instances in all of your apps.
Okay.
So that's helpful. But you can see that here. So if I just again, I'll just inspect this with the browser tools. And what we do is in here, you can see we have this extra class being applied at the top here. And that just changes the look and feel of everything. It's not overly exciting as such, but it just proves the point, really.
Yep.
And because that sits at the, you can see here, it sits on the actual modal itself. So then any div underneath that, you can then style using any of the other bits under here. So if you want to customize how the header works, you can do that using CSS. So you could say like Blazor modal prompt, and then after that, as the selector, you can then say Blazor modal header, and then you can then style that header in a specific way, but only for modals that have a parent class of Blazor modal prompt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well done.
So that's quite cool. That's quite a helpful little feature that was quite cool and people quite liked. We move on to the close button. So if we show this, this is this button over here, this close X.
Yep.
This is the default behavior for the modal, but some people don't want that because they don't want to perhaps allow the user to dismiss the modal without performing an action.
Right.
So again, using modal options, you can choose to hide that. So if I click this button now, you can see that it's gone.
Now you have to click cancel.
Exactly. And these buttons, as we saw, this is the content that you're providing as the consumer. So you're now in complete control of these buttons, which means that the user's got to click one of your buttons and you can make sure that you're handling it in the way that you want to.
Well done.
So that's that helps again developers have more control over what's going on.
Okay.
And again, like I say, you can see it here. This is all you can specify this at the global level and at the individual level.
Nice.
In a similar way, following on from that, we have the same functionality for the background click. So if we open the standard default setup, you can see here I've got my mouse over here, and if I click here, the modal is dismissed by clicking on the background.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's quite cool. But again,
that's the default.
That's the default. But following that same idea that we just talked about with the close button, you might not want to allow people to do that because you want them to click your close or cancel button directly. So you can see now, hopefully that's coming through the microphone. I'm clicking really loudly. Nothing's happening. So that there's an on click event on that background div that when you click with the mouse, it picks that up and it closes the modal. When you specify disable background click or background cancel, we just remove it so that we don't listen to that event anymore, and we just
very cool.
Yeah, click events just go. Next bit, positions. So again, in blue here we've got the default, which is the modal in the center. But of course, people want their modals in different places. So we can go top left, we can go top right, bottom. We've got bottom left, bottom right, but also we've got the ability to do custom. So you can see here, this isn't actually top left. This is just slightly in from the left in a weird position.
Right.
So you can specify that as well. And we do this again, that's in modal options. We have a position option that you can set here using this modal position enum. And then we also have, if you select modal position custom, you can then specify the position. You can then apply, and I need to check this actually because I can't.
The top and left. Yeah.
That's it. So there we go, position. You can see here, here's all the various different positions that are being applied.
Right.
And then we have this custom one down here. So if we go down and have a look at that, what we're saying here is if this is just some extra code, you wouldn't have to do quite as much of this, but we're basically saying if the position is custom, we ask you to provide a CSS class to specify what that custom position is. So as you mentioned, Carl, that would be a top and a left, or a top and a right, or a bottom and a left, or a bottom and a right, whatever you particularly wanted to specify.
Yeah.
So that really gives you complete granular control over how and where the modal's displayed, which is quite useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is a fun one. So this was a real. This is one I wasn't expecting, to be honest, as a library. Although I wasn't expecting people to really need this, but believe it or not, people like to show multiple modals
stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Stacked on top of each other. So I was curious as to what the use case was. So when this first came up, I was like, "Oh, so yeah, that's cool. We can definitely look at doing this, but why? Why would you do this?" And weird enough, it's like confirms of confirms. People like to be able to do that. So we did it. So let's click in this. So we've got this first modal. It's like, are you sure you want to delete this record? And it's like, well, yes, I'm sure I want to delete this record. And are you really sure? So you can see what's happened there. If you look very closely, you can see the background's actually slightly darker than it was before. And that's because now we've got two layers on top of each other. So that first modal is still present. It's just hidden now behind the second one. So we truly do have two layers now, two stacked modals. So I can close that. Now, what I've done there is actually done a cascading close. So that's closed all modal instances all the way down. But if I go through this again, and I click yes, if I actually click cancel on the second one, we go back to the first one.
Nice.
First one was there the whole time. It's not gone anywhere. We just removed the second instance.
And the positioning might come into play there if you have this. Yeah. So you could start in the top left and sort of, move them down a little so that you can see the context that you do have something still back there.
Yeah, if you think like Win95 Windows,
exactly.
You can have that kind of that stacked cascade going, if you wanted to. But yeah, because like we said, all of these modal options can be configured on a per instance basis. So each of those modals you can specify where they sit, so you can have that cascading effect. So
very good.
So yeah, that was an interesting one. Not something I was expecting, but something that's been quite useful to a lot of people. So that's cool. Here we go, the fun stuff. So passing data. So modals are great, and definitely the most simple case for a modal is confirmation dialogue, stuff like that. But real modals can be powerful by moving data around. So we've got a couple of examples here of passing data to a modal, and then we've got the next one we'll look at is passing data back from a modal. So I can put a message in here. So I'll say hello, Carl, and show modal. And what we've done there is pass that string up to that modal, and then we're just rendering that out. And we'll have a look at the code in a second. I'll show you how we do this.
Okay.
So that's cool. I can hit submit, and it comes back, and we just reset it. And then while we're here as well, I'll show the returning version. So this is returning data. So if I click show modal here, we have kind of the opposite way around. We'll type in foo. So if I hit submit now, you can see that we now get a return value back that's rendered out, and that's just called foo.
Nice.
So we'll jump back into Visual Studio, and I'll show you this code here. So we'll start off with passing data to a modal. So if we scroll down here into the code block. So what we're going to do is we're using this modal parameters object that we provide in Blazor.Modal. And that is just a collection of parameters that you want to pass to the component that we're going to display.
Separate from the options, but you can also pass options at the same time.
Exactly right, yeah. So we have the modals options object and we have the modals parameters object. So yeah, you can pass both of these, one of these, whatever you want to do.
Right.
So what we do is we just add the parameters that we want to pass to that component that's being displayed. And here we're saying we want to pass a component that's called message, and then we're going to pass the value of this message field, which is specified here. And it's bound up here into this input. So that's where we collect that value. And then we just call modal.show like we saw earlier. And then we just pass in that parameters object as an argument. And then what we can do is we can actually await the result back from that instance. So in this case, we don't really do anything with it. But if I jump over to the passing data or returning data from the modal, which is this one here, This one, we're not obviously passing anything into it, but what we are doing here is getting a result back. So when you call modal.show, if you're just showing something and you don't care about the result, you can just call that as a fire and forget call, and you don't have to worry about it. But what we do is give you something called an iModal reference back from that call, and that's useful if you want to then do something with the result. So this gives you an instant, a reference to the instance, basically.
Yep.
And from that, you can await the result. So that's going to sit. This code's going to sit here now, and it's going to await an action to happen in the modal. So a confirmation or a close. And then what you can do with that result, you can check if it was cancelled. So that's what we saw earlier. That's just that dismiss with no return data.
Right.
And if it's not cancelled, you can do something with it. So we have this data object type on the result, and that's just an object.
Yep.
So we can return anything you want from it. So whatever you want to return, like you mentioned earlier, Carl, lists, complex objects, simple types, whatever you want.
Cast right here.
Send it back. Exactly. Yeah. So you can just do the cast, do whatever you want. So you can see here, I'm just calling it toString because I know it's a string value.
Yep.
And I've just got this null check as well. So if it's null, I'm just going to do an empty string. Mm-hmm. So it's as simple as that. If you were returning back something more complex, like say you could do a cast or whatever you want to do with it. So then I'm just passing that result into this message field and then just displaying it up here. It's relatively simple. So that's how that works. It's quite cool the way it works.
Easy.
We pass these down. Yeah, I mean, hopefully it should be. The goal with all of this is to be as intuitive as possible for the consuming developer.
Right.
I don't want to make you have to think loads about what you want to do. I try to make this stuff as discoverable and as obvious as we can. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that if we go to this, we're displaying this display message here. So if I actually open that up, you can see that we just have a parameter here declared called message. And if we go back to that pass data to modal, you can see that's exactly how we're setting it up. So we're saying we have a parameter called message, and this is the value we want to pass to it. And we go over here, and then you as a consumer, you just declare your parameter for your component, the same as you would for anything else. So it keeps within the Blazor model. You know, I'm not trying to introduce some different way of doing something for you. You just declare your parameter like normal. So
great stuff, Chris.
I'm glad you like it. So that's cool. So that's that bit. This is another new addition. This is quite cool. So I'm really lucky that I've got quite a few people who contribute to Blazor Modal. I think when I last checked, we've had about 16 contributors from the community, and this is a community contribution, this long-running task. So this is for people who wanted to use the modal as more of a loading indicator, basically. We now have the ability, you can click on one of these long-running tasks, and it's just going to show a spinner for a set amount of time. So people wanted to be able to do this to when they're, say, making a call back to their API to save some data. They can programmatically trigger an instance of the modal. At that point, they make that HTTP call, and then they can wait for that HTTP call to finish and then programmatically close the modal instance. So it's like a nice dynamic loading indicator for you.
Yeah.
So this one here is slightly different. This comes back with an OK result. So this might be tied into that HTTP call. Make sure it's a success before it does something. Mm-hmm. And this is the same again with the cancelled result. It's actually a bit boring to look at. It doesn't really do a lot here. But yeah, so that's another good use case. So you can see, again, it's using that reference. So you can see here in the code, we capture that reference when we call modal.show, and then we can just call loading.close to programmatically close it after your long-running task that sits in the middle.
Nice.
So that's that. And then we've got animation here. So again, this is another community contribution. So, that's always cool. So we've got a 1 second delay here, and we just got to fade in. So it fades the modal in, and you can do a dismiss. We also have the equivalent, which is fade out. So we can hit close. You can see that nicely fades out and disappears. You can obviously try this with different values here. So if I do a form or do a fade in, you can see it comes in much slower. so you can configure all this yourself.
Sure.
Fade in and fade out. So obviously fades in over a period of time, and you can cancel and fade out over the same period of time.
Yeah.
So that's all. Again, this is all customizable through that modal options object. So you can see here you've got animation. You call modal animation dot, and then fade in or fade out, and then pass in the number of seconds that you want.
Is seconds the only time unit? Can I have milliseconds, or do I just?
I think at the moment it's only seconds, but I think I've got an issue to change that to milliseconds, so you can have it much more granular.
Yeah.
You could put in there, I think,
0.5
I'm
or
right in
something.
saying you could do that with like a 0.2. I think it'll take like.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
You can actually do it like that. So you can say like 0.2.
Can't even really see it, but do like 0.5. We could probably see 0.5.
Let's do a 0.5. Let's do a 0.5. So 0.5.
Oh yeah.
Much quicker.
Yeah.
So you can actually specify it that way. So instead of having to do 500 milliseconds, you can just do 0.5. So
beautiful.
So yeah, that's good. I can close that issue actually. Then we don't need that.
Boom.
That's brilliant. So that's cool. Thanks for that, Carl.
You're welcome.
And the same thing works for multiples as well. So you can see that same. You can see now actually that second modal fading in over the top of the first.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that same thing going out again. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want it this slow in real life, but you know, it does the thing. So that's quite cool.
I like it.
So that's great. And then the last one, and again, this is a pretty new addition, is a custom layout. So what is the custom layout? This is where we allow you to take complete control over everything. So when you choose to use custom layout, we're basically saying, we're not going to provide any markup for you at all. You can now provide everything completely custom. Wow. So if we click show modal this time, you can see this looks entirely different to the modals we've been looking at so far. And this is all completely bespoke. This is actually using some of the Bootstrap modal styles. So you might notice if you're used to using Bootstrap, it's rendering in the same place that a Bootstrap modal does. Doesn't quite look the same. There's a couple of styles that are just a bit off, and it's on my list of things to do to tidy this up. But once I've done, this would look exactly the same as a Bootstrap modal, and it uses all of the Bootstrap classes. So if you don't want to use any of the layout or the styling we provide out of the box, no problem. You can just specify everything yourself.
So what's the difference between that and the styling demo that you did where you pass in the class for the style?
Yeah, I'll show you in code because I think that will speak a million words. So
all right, cool.
I'm going to drop into the actual, this is the actual Blazor.Modal source code. I'm going to open the Blazor.Modal instance, and this is the difference right here. So this is, if you're using a custom layout, we're going to render whatever you tell us to render, and we will render nothing else at all. All we're going to provide you is that cascading value of that modal instance, so you can close it however you need to. In comparison, if we look at this else block down here, this is everything that we normally render for you. I see. And your content just gets popped here. So all of this outer code, so the main container, the overlay that does that background, that dark and transparent background, the main container, all of that stuff we normally render for you. And to answer your specific question about the difference between that and providing a custom class, well, when you provide us a custom class, we just pop that class here, this computed field here of class. We add that, whatever you give us, we pop that in there, but we still render everything else. So we still render the background.
So you do, with the custom class, you have control over the look style stuff, but you've still got the handle, the background click, you've got all those other features that are enabled.
Exactly right. We do all of this for you still. You're just literally dealing with the look and feel of the modal itself. And like I say, if I pop back up here, in comparison,
that's it.
With use custom layout, you're not getting any help from us. You are 100% in control of everything you do.
But what you are getting is the magic that you do with the CSS to avoid pop-ups and make it look or make it work like a modal.
Yeah, exactly. And you can just do it. So if I pop open this custom Bootstrap modal, this is what actually gets displayed in the sample project that we're just looking at, the running app. So as you can see here, this looks a little bit different. So for example, you do have to do more work here. So this is the background, that slightly translucent background. You have to handle the on-click event yourself. We don't do that for you. You can see here, this is then a load of Bootstrap stuff here. We give you access to that title that's passed in by calling that modal.show call. But again, you're responsible for where you render that title. You have to deal with the close yourself. So let's say you're in complete control here. You can customize this entirely to your needs without any interference from us.
It's awesome.
So if all of the other customizing stuff we gave you wasn't enough, you can fall back to this and literally have complete fine-grained control.
Man, I can't think of one use case that you haven't covered that I would want to use a dialogue for, a modal dialogue. So Chris, I'd like to thank you again for making this in the first place, for making it available for free, and giving your time to our viewers today so that we can take full advantage of this. Thank you very much.
That's my pleasure, Carl. Anytime to talk about Blazor, I'm always up for it.
Awesome.
And, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all the contributors who have helped with Blazor.Modal, because without them, I wouldn't have got anywhere near as much stuff done as I have. So
yeah, before we go, do you want to talk about your book?
Yeah. So Blazor in action. So I'm writing an in-action book for Manning. Just finished chapter 2. I'm just doing my first set of edits for chapter 2 after I had some feedback from my editor. So we're working on that, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll hopefully have that available in Meep relatively soon. So
great.
So that's progressing along nicely, and I hope you're all gonna like it and find it useful. So that'll be coming along soon.
Oh, great. And of course, in the meantime, you can go to chrissainty.com to get all this stuff. All right. The next thing I want to show you is how DevExpress does modal dialogues with their DX Popup. Now, this is part of a suite of components that DevExpress offers. And if you want to get that and install it, follow the instructions at devexpress.com/Blazor. Okay. So take a look at this simple index page. We've defined DX Popup, and we've set the visible property of this component to show popup, which is a Boolean property. Now I've set it to false by default. All we really have to do if we want to show the popup is set that to true and invoke status changed, and it pops up. We've got the header text, message dialog, and just a little message in the content. Hi there. Couldn't be easier. All right, there it is. Show my pop-up, message dialog, hi there. Now, it's very simple, but we could start adding features to this. The next demo that I'm going to show adds input. So we have an input tag right here, and we're binding this to pop-up text, which is this guy right down there, pop-up text. And we have our show pop-up that does the same thing. Now we've got a close button click handler, pop-up canceled, and we've added a button that calls pop-up OK clicked. So we've got an OK and a cancel. And so in our OK, we hide the pop-up. Everything's good. In our pop-up canceled, we're going to reset pop-up text because it's bound in that input, right? We're going to just reset that to nothing. So here's what that looks like. All right. Here's our message. Hey there. And there we go. Here's the result from the pop-up, hey there. Now, what happens if I click the cancel button? Well, everything gets reset and the pop-up goes down. Boom, just like that. All right, now the next little demo has some customization in the form of a header template. Now there's a header template, there's a footer template, and there's all sorts of ways that you can style this, but needless to say, this is what we're doing now. We've got a header template where I've set the background color to red, the color to white, and I've given it some padding, and that's going to go across the top. We don't have a cancel button here, so we've added a cancel button down below in the content, which we use the content tags for. So one button for OK, one for cancel, and the rest of our code is exactly the same. So let's try that one. And there you go. So data in, data out, binding, all the standard Blazor stuff that you're already used to, and pretty darn simple. We didn't have to do any cascading parameters or anything like that or create any new classes. We just did it all with the standard DX Popup. Back to you in the studio, Carl. I'd like to thank my guest, Chris Sainty, and my sponsor, DevExpress. Lots of Blazor goodness happening out there. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. BlazorTrain!